went on a date with this guy and it turned out he was in VC, and then they invested 150,000 in our business.
No way.
This all came from Rhea, which is insane. When you're so determined to make something work, you're looking for opportunities everywhere. Those mistakes that I made and the learnings from them, I will never make these mistakes again. I was headed for disaster, growth at all costs. I was hyper masculine. Stop right now. I had insane burnout after that. My entire body broke out in hives. I couldn't sleep at night. It was one of the most difficult times of the journey for me. Now, knowing that, I would be like, red flag, absolutely not. There is a really big gap in business for intuition and feminine energies, and we should all aim to be more balanced when it comes to business.
Hello and welcome back to Strategy and Tragedy, the show all about how to scale and fail in business. Join me for regular interviews with some incredible guests, including the likes of Mandy Nyarko, MBE, Liv Furdy of Trip Drinks, Nick Towson-Sillett of Design My Night, and so many more inspirational entrepreneurs who I've had the absolute honor of interviewing. Today's guest is, of course, no exception. But just before we dive in, I have to say a huge thank you to you right there listening in. I really appreciate you tuning into this show. And of course, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the show. Okay, now on to my next guest. Georgie Hyatt, I cannot wait to get into this conversation, is the Forbes 30 Under 30 founder and CEO of ROTARO, the fashtech platform that work directly with luxury brands and retailers to power their circular fashion revenue streams through rental and resale before consolidating with My Wardrobe HQ. Georgie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Steph. I'm very excited to be here today.
You are not as excited as I am. Talking fashion, tech, startups, these are all of my favorite things. So let's dive in. So what was the birth of the idea for ROTARO back when you were working at WGSN?
So I've always known that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'm from South Africa, which seems to breed a lot of entrepreneurs, people who are quite pioneering and creating spaces for themselves. Both of my parents are entrepreneurs and so are their families. So for me, it was I was always going to start something. I didn't ever doubt myself, which is slightly insane. But I knew that I wanted to create a business for myself and I just didn't know what. And so I followed my passions and my interests, and this led me to WGSN. I've always been really interested in psychology, innovation, and positive impact. And finding WGSN, which was this incredible platform for consumer insights and trend forecasting, I found I was so stimulated. We were looking into the future. We were looking at innovation, looking at consumer behavior shifts 5 years in advance. So this was absolutely fascinating to me. And when we were looking 2 years in advance, we were very much tracking the future of fashion, which lies in circularity, rental, resale. And I saw a really big gap in the market for a fashion rental platform to work directly with brands. At the time, there were a couple of fashion rental platforms, but they were peer-to-peer. And what I really wanted to do was change consumer behavior away from single-use fashion, away from people purchasing a garment to wear it once and then sit in their closet for until the end of time. And so in order to change that consumer behavior, I really believe that you need to create a service that is as seamless and close to online shopping as possible. And that's why we decided to work directly with the brands as opposed to peer-to-peer, because we wanted to ensure that your garments were going to arrive on time, cleaned, right sizes, good quality.
Love that. Makes a ton of sense. And I'll jump in here really briefly because already you get my cogs turning. So it reminds me a little bit of the interview that I also did with Thomas Panton, who is this really passionate entrepreneur on a mission to help slow down at least or reverse climate change. And he was very much like not being naive about it and very much understanding consumer behavior, human psychology. Like, you're not going to affect change if you're just bashing people around the head with this stuff. People have now been conditioned to have that convenience, have things that are easy, simple. So that's what comes to mind here with what you were saying. You still deliver that seamlessness, the reliability of the brand. The other thing, you've already made me think so much, and just that opening answer there, it's inevitable to draw the parallels again with another guest who I believe that fashtech entrepreneur, also from South Africa, Bianca Rangecroft, who in a similar position to you spotted that opportunity, being she was in a position to be like, oh, okay. So back to you. So WGSN, so you already had this entrepreneurial spirit, and that afforded you the opportunity to spot that gap in the market. So what was your next steps then? Did you get any market validation, or were you just like, you had that self-confidence, that belief to just go for it?
What we first did was we created a survey very early on and sent it out to about 200 friends, and really just gathered information on, how much people would be willing to spend, what type of brands they're looking for, would they even rent, what would they rent for, and really just trying to build up that customer profile and understand who they were. But I also knew that I was the customer as well. So it was contemporary brands that were very well made, but out of our price range. We couldn't spend 600, 1,000 pounds on a dress to go to a wedding. And so that first piece of research was great validation for us. But what we did was, it was very much a garage operation. We set up a website on Shopify. At the very beginning, this was my first business, and it was very much just move fast and break things and learn at 1,000 miles an hour, which I did. I made so many mistakes, but those mistakes that I made and the learnings from them, I will never make these mistakes again. Right. And I feel so grateful for them. But so we set up the website. We firstly just bought garments, secondhand garments off like eBay, Depop, because we just wanted to test what brands people would be drawn to, what styles they'd be attracted to. And we quickly got a picture of the type of things that people wanted to be renting. Then we moved on to contacting brands directly to work with them in a wholesale capacity. And this was when we had put some Ghani pieces on the website, and we're just advertising all the garments we had on board. And then one day we got a legal letter from Ghani saying, we don't approve of you marketing our product like this. And they attached this legal letter, and we combed through it, and we realized that actually we weren't doing anything wrong as long as we didn't advertise their actual branding. So we ignored their legal letter and carried on renting their garments, just not advertising their brand name. And then 2 years later, one of my favorite stories from ROTARO is that they then came back to us and were like, hey, we would like you to be our rental partner.
I love that.
So that was very much my attitude.
Vindication.
My attitude was just, I back this idea. I think it's the right time. I think it's the right product. It's the right market. And I just went for it. It was very much a ask for forgiveness, not permission attitude.
Exactly. I love that.
I think that's also quite a South African cavalier attitude to have. It's like, it's not me, it's just passed down from my ancestors. So then we were now operating in a wholesale model with our brand partners, and we figured that this wasn't the most effective use of our resources. And we then eventually moved to a consignment model with our brand partners. So they were giving us stock and we were acting more as a service for them. This was a big learning for us. We had lots of trials and mixes of wholesale and consignment.
An observation that I'm making here is that really magical combination of the self-belief, the confidence, that pure entrepreneurial spirit, that there's a gap in the market, there's an opportunity. But then you do balance that with a very logical, sensible, almost like step-by-step process, at least in those early days of getting that market validation. Because I think there is, I'm fascinated by that fine line between the entrepreneurial delusion, which you kind of need to get a business off the ground, versus actually being fully deluded, right? Yeah. So what I'm curious about, just sticking with those early days for a second there, is with that market validation, how much, if at all, did your hypothesis about the business opportunity change from the opportunity you spotted with when you were at WGSN after you did the survey, the MVP, and you got some of that evidence?
It was pretty much exactly what I thought it was going to be.
But then also, sorry, I'm being cruel to be kind here, right? It's a bit of devil's advocate. It's also hard to fall out of love with an idea that so it's, a lot of entrepreneurs do say that. They might fully be right, as I'm sure you are as well. But it's hard to stay open-minded enough to actually change that vision depending on the evidence. But in your case, there was enough evidence that matched the hypothesis, would you say?
If you're enjoying this episode, then you can probably guess what I want you to do. Please do me one tiny favor that costs you nothing and takes a second of your time. Hit that subscribe button. It really helps to support the show, and I'm really grateful for you listening. Let's get back into it.
Yeah, there was enough evidence that matched the hypothesis, and I'm very glad that it did, because touching on your point about delusion, you need that level of complete passion and all in. And I'm very glad that the evidence backed up what I had predicted, because it felt like an extension of myself in a way that ended up actually being quite detrimental to me. But initially launching that project and getting off the ground felt like the most natural extension of my being, and just creating something and bringing it into the world. There's nothing more empowering and wonderful and energizing than that.
Love that.
And it was like the brand mix, the type of brands, the customer. It was people I knew on a daily basis. We were all looking at the same brands. We were attending the same events. It was in my sphere, and so
everything slot together.
It was just very natural, and the energy was perfectly aligned for that time.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's also something there where you're a friend of mine, he talks about, are you pushing it on an open door or are you trying to push this boulder uphill? And I think there is maybe too much pressure for new entrepreneurs to maybe come up with like something that's so revolutionary, that's so innovative, that's so disruptive, because of course we've got the likes of the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world, but you can make life a lot easier for yourself by pushing on that open door. And it's great when it does feel very natural and it all kind of flows. All right, so early days, getting it off the ground. Did you need any funding for the tech side of things? What's the next chapter in your story here with ROTARO?
So at the very beginning, we were just powered by Shopify, in fact, for a very long time. And so we really only needed funding for team and marketing. We did friends and family round, and that took us for about 1.5 years. And then we took on some external investment from angels and VC. And that was essentially to grow the team. And this was at the point where we were starting to look at pivoting, or not pivoting the business. I'm going to say that again. This was the time we started to look at introducing a new revenue model, which was a B2B SaaS platform for fashion rental and resale. And so that's why we needed to take on more external funding at that time.
And on the external funding, I heard through the grapevine that you managed to secure funding through a Tinder date.
Yes, it wasn't Tinder. It was an app called Raya, which is plagued by drum and bass DJs and Instagram models. And I don't know what I was doing on it, but I was single at the time. And when you're fundraising, any lead is a good lead. And so I went on a date with this guy off of Raya, and he was lovely. We had a good time. We then went on to a second date and we met at a pub. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to bring some of my friends on the date," which I thought was slightly unconventional, but I was like, okay, it's great, it's summer.
More the merrier,
more
network.
The merrier, let's go.
More leads.
Network, more leads, exactly. Exactly.
Bring your friends.
Yeah. Bring all your friends and VC,
Bring
please.
your ex-girlfriends,
exactly.
Bring everyone.
And so one of his German friends arrived on this date, and
That is weird, actually, like joking. So wait, was it one friend?
No, he invited a bunch of friends on the date.
All right.
It was weird.
Okay.
At the time, I was thinking this is really strange. And basically, his one German friend arrived and we engaged in conversation, and there was a lot of chemistry actually, and we got along very well, and it turned out he was in VC. And then he asked for my number whilst I was on this date with this other guy.
Oh my God.
It was a very weird situation. And then I stayed on the date with the initial guy, went for dinner with him and his friend for our second date, which was so strange. And then I went home because I just thought it was actually all too weird and not how I wanted to spend the rest of my day. I then got a text from this new German guy who was going out to a techno club with his friends, and he said, hey, come and join us, come dancing. And I was a very stressed entrepreneur at the time, so I said, absolutely not. I'm in bed. It's 10 p.m. If you want to see me, we can hang out tomorrow, which is a Sunday, during the day. And so he texted me the next day. We hang out in Primrose Hill. We hit it off, and he's in town because he's organizing a climate technology VC and entrepreneur dinner.
Wow.
And he invited me to this dinner, which was happening on the Tuesday. And I attended the dinner and met these incredible founders and investors within the climate tech space, and found out that there's this really cool group called the Climate Tech Voyagers, which is a wonderful group of supportive entrepreneurs and investors within the climate tech space. And then I met the founder of it, and I was added to this group. And once you're added to the group, you get access to hundreds of emails of investors in the space.
Once you're in, you're in,
Once
right?
you're in, you're in. And so...
What a stroke of luck.
Such a stroke of luck.
Wow.
I basically went through this list of emails, and I emailed every single person on the 500 email list, and most of them didn't respond. Mostly no's who did respond, and then one person responded, yes, let's meet tomorrow at Soho House.
Amazing.
So, ran to Soho House, met this guy who was like 24, working for and representing a small VC fund. And he loved our story, loved our vision. And then the next day we met the team, and then they invested 150,000 in our business. So
no way.
This all came from Rhea, which is insane.
Yeah.
And it was like 8 steps away from Rhea.
Yeah.
But it just goes to show, when you're so determined to make something work, you're looking for opportunities everywhere.
Exactly. You know, I asked you that question about the Tinder stories. Obviously it's hilarious and it's a great story to tell, but you're right, the business lesson that you can extract from that is like, these opportunities, they can come from anywhere and everywhere. You have got to maybe not sign up to Ray. That is obviously a little bit of a little bit of an unconventional strategy to take, but it is putting yourself out there. It is being open to those opportunities. So well done you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's so fun. So you'd schmoozed these investors. You've been down to Soho House and managed to persuade this 24-year-old. What happened between that gap of saying that they're going to commit to actually money in the bank, and how long was that period?
So with these investors that I'm talking about, that money came through, but this was part of a bigger round that we were raising. And a slight tragedy to touch on was we were speaking to a couple of funds, and we were raising £1.5 million at the time. And one asset manager had committed £1 million to us, and we had signed an initial letter of intent, and it had an expiry date. And basically we spent tens of thousands of pounds going back and forth on finalizing on the shareholders agreement for many months. And we had hired people on the basis that we were getting this £1 million in the bank, and pulled the trigger on some of our projects. And after a long time of negotiating, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, this asset manager then decided to pull out. I believe that they were watching us from afar and drawing out the process to give them more leverage. And at the time, we needed that cash to grow and execute. And so they were holding out to get a better deal. And then we were sort of floundering whilst waiting for the cash to come in the bank.
Yeah.
So something that we did that was a mistake was hired the team too soon and focused on growth at all costs without having cash in the bank. And as we all know, cash is king. And I learned that mistake the very hard way, because I then had to let go half of the team. And it was very difficult because it was quite a setback for the business. And these are just the lessons in business that you learn sometimes the really hard way and you will never make again. And I think at the time, first time entrepreneurship, the narrative was very much growth at all costs. We were in this era of cheap cash. It was like the Ubers, the Deliveroos. And now we all know that that has very much changed, and businesses, as they should be, are focusing more on longevity, sustainability, profitability. And I think I was just like a young founder, excited and trigger happy, and I learnt my lesson the hard way.
Yeah, it sounds awful. I can only imagine what that did to you internally as well, like emotionally. I mean, I definitely would have been a wreck. So we'll come on to the whole kind of the physical and mental health side of things as well, because I think that's super important to touch on. I know you've got a story there too, but you know, I think it is worth, I do love to cut my entrepreneurial guests some slack with these things. Right? Obviously I know the title is strategy and tragedy and what we learn from those mistakes, but you had that energy, that hustle, that excitement that not only got this business off the ground, but drove it to this place that it was. So yeah, should you have waited until all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed and the money's actually sat in the bank? Yes, especially when you're making commitments to other people and their livelihoods depend on it. But at the same time, I guess this is, you know, your first rodeo in that particular sense. You have no reason to believe otherwise, and you're thinking, well, also time is valuable too. Like we also need to make decisions, move. There's only so much talent available in the market. So yeah, just want to cut you a bit of slack on that one as well.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you. I think what I was doing was I was just continuing the momentum.
Exactly.
And that came at a big cost.
Yeah, exactly. So do you mind me just sticking with this again for a second? Can I just get clear, fact check a few things? So how long did that process take of the back and forth on the shareholders agreement?
8 months.
8 months.
Which now, knowing that, I would be like, red flag, absolutely not.
Okay.
Our lawyer didn't flag that as being unusual. People that were advising us didn't flag that as being unusual.
Why do you think
they would just say, a shareholders agreement for priced equity round can take some months. But when it got on to 8 months,
this is just ridiculous.
It was absolutely ridiculous. And then we then got a new lawyer, obviously, and he said that he had never seen this before. Wow. It was totally unprecedented for a fund to treat a startup like this. And then I think we subsequently saw a lot of funds mistreating startups in a similar manner.
You knew what to look out for then. And this is why, you know, you're a great guest to have on this show for many, many reasons, but specifically here as well with the strategies and tragedies along the way. So now in hindsight, now that you know, and to listeners, 8 months is far too long to go back and forth on a shareholder agreement. When would you cut things off now? 1 month, 3 months, 6 months?
You really need to apply the pressure to your investors. It has to be, you have to create a FOMO experience for them. And no longer than 1 month, ideally.
Wow, okay.
To just really...
much longer.
The thing is that it depends how many investors you have coming on board, because it's kind of like herding cats. You have to get everybody to agree on the terms, and I would really push it to be as quick as possible. Yeah. Maybe a couple of months at most.
And then during that 8 month period, at which point in those 8 months did you pull the trigger on making those hires that you then had to fire later down the road?
Probably around halfway.
Okay, so a few months in. Do you know what? I mean, also, I just have that itch to scratch, right? You want to be like, come on, I want to go.
Well, they had signed a letter that they were going through with us, and we had both spent tens of thousands of pounds on legal fees for the shareholders agreement. It was in motion.
Wow. So
it was one signature away from money in the bank. It was in motion.
All the more reason to cut yourself some slack here as well, right? Because it's like you do have income paper. You've all spent, you got the sunk cost financially and time as well in the process. Oh, Georgie, this is insane. What a dirty game it sounds like they played. And then when you'd hired those people about halfway through, then when did you know you had to pull the trigger?
Well, when they pulled out was one of the most stressful days of my life. Yeah. And that was actually then when I went on a big scramble and raised more money. And that was raising on safe notes or ASA agreements. And that's a much better way for you to just get money in the bank as somebody commits. Because what we found with this priced equity round, to get, 20 investors together, and some of them are drawing it out, we had people falling off along the way. And actually, when you're a small enough business like we were, I would really recommend just using these quick safe note ASA agreements. So as soon as you have somebody who is keen in investing, just get their money in the door and sign that agreement. So after they fell away, I went on a crazy rampage of fundraising and starting again.
So horrific.
We had still 500 committed, which was great, but I had a big gap to fill because of the hires that I'd made. And so...
Did you manage to fill that gap?
Not 1 million, but I raised quite a few 100,000, which helped us, but we still had to make redundancies.
Yeah. And so when you knew that you had to do that, was it just a case of ripping off the Band-Aid, or any tips for anyone that will need to make that horrible decision?
There is nothing worse than making your first set of redundancies, because especially when you're a small business, you have convinced people to join you on their journey, to leave their cushy jobs, to join you on this pioneering, fun, dynamic experience, but it's also very risky. And you hope that you're never going to have to make these decisions, but I think every founder at some stage is going to have to make layoffs. And it was really difficult. It was one of the most difficult times of the journey for me, was letting these people down that had joined me on my mission.
Yeah. So while we're on this, and sorry to stick with this sort of gloomy part of the story, but I think this is a segue into what that then did to your physical and mental health. So what happened next with you personally?
Yeah, wow. I had insane burnout after that. What I was doing was, I spent 3 months after that fund pulled out, 3 months living in flight or fight mode, where I had this team, I had to keep going. I couldn't share the stress with them because it was my responsibility to ensure we had more funding in. I was waking up and going to bed every night with my adrenaline through the roof. And it was just all act. I was completely detached from my body. I was disembodied, and I was almost looking at myself from a third person experience, because there's nothing less grounding than the sort of stress that you're experiencing. And basically I was up in Manchester doing a panel discussion for Meta, and my entire body broke out in hives, and I had never had anything like this in my life, and I didn't know what it was, and I basically had to take a leave of absence from my startup for a month, and I went home to my family's house, and I had to figure out what was wrong with me, because I couldn't sleep at night because of the hives. I couldn't operate during the day because I was sleeping for 12 hours a day. It was like my body said, absolutely enough, stop right now. And it's actually incredible that your body can communicate with you in such a way to say, what you're doing is absolutely killing you. Enough is enough. And I'm so grateful to my body for doing that, because that was a real moment in time where I was on the wrong path. Absolutely. I was headed for disaster, and that then began my 2-3 year journey of reconnecting with my body, reconnecting with my intuition, myself, becoming embodied again, because I think entrepreneurship and capitalism and being a founder can often get you living in your head and feeling very disconnected from what's happening within you, and you lose your intuition and you lose your better judgment. Had I been more connected to my body during this period, maybe I would have made different decisions. Maybe I wouldn't have pulled the trigger on a project that we didn't have the money for yet, with the hope that it did, if I was more in touch with my body and more grounded. And so that is like my biggest lesson, is to always remain in my body and grounded and listen to myself.
Yeah, you're totally right. It's a very shoulders up kind of experience, isn't it? And I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear, but it is probably the most commonly recurring theme on this show, which is how much the mind, the drive, the passion, whatever you want to call it, the pressure, you know, can override the physical body until, like what happened to you and like what's happened to many others on the show as well, until the body starts giving you those signals and says enough is enough.
Yeah.
And there's that phrase that I always cock it up, but what's that phrase about, you know, your body will let you know, and it won't be at a convenient time. Yes, right? So like
exactly.
You might be about to go out onto a panel with Meta before your body like comes out in hives.
Exactly.
Which is like crazy, Georgie.
Yeah.
So crazy.
Yeah, it was a crazy
But it is amazing.
time.
Like you're saying, you're grateful to your body. It is amazing. We do have these physical bodies that we forget about that send us these signals.
Yeah, it was a very difficult lesson to learn, and I wish and hope to never be in that physical space again, and I will always continue to be an entrepreneur, but I want to do entrepreneurship in a more embodied, grounded, intuitive way.
Yeah,
and I
love
think that there is a space for that, and what I'm really excited about and passionate about is creating these new systems and structures of entrepreneurship that's more equitable, that's more intuitive, that's a bit more feminine, because whilst I was also in this very disembodied way, I was hyper masculine.
Yeah.
Like I was all action, no feeling. And there is a really big gap in business for like intuition and feminine energies and ways of being. And I hope that I can be a part of, in the future, it's my long-term goal to create these new systems and structures where we can create better businesses that are better for us as founders and for everyone else.
I love that so much, Georgie. I want to give you a high five on that. I love it. I'm totally here with you on that.
Thank you.
You're totally right. And I think especially given the fact that we are kind of in that tech industry as well, you've got, you know, predominantly like so very male. And like you say, it's like masculine energy can still absolutely manifest even in a woman. And it's easy to forget all of that stuff. But bringing all those other parts of our being together is what will set us up for success. So you've kind of answered a few of the questions I was going to ask you next. I was going to ask what's next. Is there any more that you can build on? You've talked about these systems, these structures. Can you share a little bit more about that? Or are there any projects that you can talk about now?
Well, what I'm interested in building next all comes off the back of my experience. So my experience in wellness, losing my health, taking part in these systems and structures and ways of being that didn't serve me and my body. And so I'm really investigating the wellness, health space and the entrepreneurship space. I really want to guide people, and I really want to optimize people's existence on the planet. And I think to be healthy and looking after your body, I really want to optimize people's existence whilst they're on the planet. And I'm investigating a few areas within wellness when it comes to physical, mental, and spiritual well-being, and also relating to how entrepreneurs can embody both sides of their masculinity and femininity, not only for women, let me just say, but also for men. I think men can benefit from introducing more femininity and empathy into their leadership styles as well, because it's a delicate balance that we all have, and I think we should all aim to be more balanced when it comes to business.
Definitely. I love that so much. It's genuine. You know, I said in the intro, like what a pleasure it is to get to sit down with amazing entrepreneurs like yourself. But I love how we're going deeper than just like the buzzwords. So things like mission, impact. It's such a wonderful mission that you're on. It's coming from that place of true authenticity with this lived tragedy, if you like, this lived experience that you've had. So I've no doubt you'll be a success. The learnings that you've acquired through ROTARO will just set you up for that greater success next time around. So I'm super excited to see what you do next.
Thank you, Steph.
So traditional closing question on this show is, what's one big tragedy that's taught you an unforgettable lesson? I feel like we've already touched that in your story.
Yeah, we have.
So is there anything else you'd like to share? Any other pearls of wisdom from the ROTARO story that we haven't already covered?
I think the most important thing for me and what I've learned is building a business that is aligned with your values and being very clear on what your own personal values are and what your business's values are. Because I think burnout comes from when you aren't living in alignment with your values and you're going up against something time and time again and failing time and time again. And if I had known and identified what my personal values were, and the top one for me is mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, I would have known when to steer the ship in a different direction or take things a different direction or just take a step back and not think that I have to do growth at all costs. And had I actively identified my personal values earlier on, I would have probably avoided burnout. But it's a difficult lesson that I'm actually very grateful for. I've learned so much in my entrepreneurship journey, and building and creating something to me is the biggest privilege on the planet, to imagine something and bring it to life. And all the mistakes that go along with it are just the absolute joys and the roller coaster of life.
Of the adventure.
Yeah.
No, I totally get it. And we're on exactly the same wavelength there, because I had a devil's advocate voice that came into my mind there listening to you on the values piece, because I'm kind of wondering, like, could you have, hindsight is a wonderful thing, right? So like, could you have fast tracked that a few years ago, or did you need to grow through what you go through, right? So
absolutely, I needed to learn all of these lessons,
right.
And I'm so grateful for them. I wouldn't change a single thing.
Wow, that's quite a bold statement considering the pain that you went through. I'm impressed. You've got the right mindset about it.
I'm more connected to myself than ever before, even before ROTARO, and so it's just part of my evolution and my growth.
Love that. Fantastic to hear. Georgie, a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Steph. I've loved our conversation, and thank you for giving me the platform to share my tragedies and lessons.
Absolutely. No, lots to take away for our listeners. So please do what you can to learn from Georgie's story. I think definitely don't let any shareholder agreements take 8 months is something that I'm taking from this. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you've made it this far, I am your new #1 fan. Thank you so much for listening. Really hope you've enjoyed this chat here with Georgie. Hit that subscribe button. Do it now so you don't miss out on future episodes, and hopefully see you next time.